Let me give you one number before we begin. In the first 5 months of 2025 alone, January through May, Rivers State received over 114 billion naira in oil derivation revenue from the Federation account. 114 billion naira in 5 months. That is money that flows into Government House in Port Harcourt every single month, regardless of the crisis, regardless of the politics, regardless of who is fighting with whom. That is not a governorship. That is a treasury. And right now, 3 of the most powerful political operators Nigeria has produced in a generation are locked in a brutal multi-front war over who controls it. Governors in most Nigerian states fight over political relevance. In Rivers State, they fight over something far more consequential, one of the highest state revenue bases on the African continent. And while everyone is debating Wike's Rainbow Coalition and whether Fubara will survive to see 2027, and whether Amaechi is genuinely running for president, nobody is asking the question that actually matters. Is this a political battle, or is it a financial war dressed up in political clothes? Before this video ends, I will show you the one constitutional clause that gives Wike more structural power over Rivers State's future than either the current governor or any challenger, and it has nothing to do with elections. Before we go further, if you are new here, Naija Brief exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis that mainstream media will not. Whether you are in Abuja, Lagos, Kano, Port Harcourt, or London, this channel is for you. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets much deeper. To understand what you're watching in Rivers State right now, you cannot start the clock in 2023. You have to go back to 2007. That is when Rotimi Amaechi first became governor of Rivers State. And over 8 years in office, Amaechi built something his successors have spent years trying to undo. He built a functioning political infrastructure: roads, agricultural programs, an educational foundation, and, critically, a network of political relationships and patronage systems that made Rivers one of the most organized state machines in Nigeria at the time. Then Wike came. When Nyesom Wike succeeded Amaechi in 2015, he did not simply put his own stamp on governance. He systematically dismantled what Amaechi had built. Agricultural projects were abandoned, security architecture was reconfigured from the ground up, and the political machine was rebuilt around a single organizing principle: Wike's dominance or nothing. Under his tenure as governor, Wike destroyed many of the agricultural, educational, and security projects Amaechi had initiated, turning Rivers State into a theater of political conflict in order to consolidate his own control. Understand that pattern, because it is the same pattern now being applied in reverse to Siminalayi Fubara, a successor erasing a predecessor. It is the defining cycle of Rivers State. Now we come to 2023. When Fubara won the governorship, he did so as Wike's hand-picked successor. Wike had chosen him. Wike had activated the full force of the party machinery to deliver him the office, and Wike had fully expected to remain in everything but title the real power in Government House long after he departed for Abuja as FTT minister. Fubara had other ideas. As Fubara began consolidating his own power base and asserting administrative independence, Wike's response was swift and severe. In December 2023, 27 members of the Rivers State House of Assembly, loyal to Wike, defected from the PDP to the APC. This was dressed up as a political realignment. It was, in practice, a coordinated legislative coup designed to make Fubara ungovernable. A governor without a legislature cannot pass a budget, cannot borrow money, cannot confirm appointments, cannot govern. And then the crisis crossed from political to constitutional. The Rivers State House of Assembly was set on fire, allegedly by Fubara's supporters, allegedly to prevent an imminent impeachment vote from being conducted. On March 18, 2025, President Tinubu declared a state of emergency in Rivers State. Governor Fubara, his deputy, and every member of the State House of Assembly were suspended. Retired Vice Admiral Ibok Ete Ibas was appointed as sole administrator. One of Nigeria's most economically consequential states was being run by a presidential appointee for 6 months. The emergency was lifted on September 17, 2025. Tinubu cited what he called a groundswell of a new spirit of understanding among stakeholders. Fubara, his deputy, the speaker, and the assembly members were all directed to resume their offices. What has happened since is the real story. The peace did not hold. Fubara defected to the APC, a condition of the peace deal, but he has now purchased his own APC governorship nomination forms for 2027 in direct defiance of the conditions Wike imposed as the price of the deal. He has swallowed the terms on paper and ignored them in practice. And Rotimi Amaechi, the man Wike replaced, has re-entered the stage from a completely unexpected angle. He has formally launched a 2027 presidential bid under the ADC platform, positioning himself as a credible, governance-focused alternative to the current administration. 3 men, 3 agendas, one state that generates more revenue than most African countries manage in a year. And to understand why this 3-way dynamic is structurally more dangerous than any previous River State power struggle, you need to understand the legal architecture underpinning it, because Wike has not just been building a political coalition, he has been building a constitutional chokehold.
This crisis operates simultaneously on 3 distinct constitutional levels. Each level favors a different actor, and understanding of 3 is the only way to grasp why this conflict is so difficult to resolve. Level 1. The governorship. Under the 1999 Constitution, the governor of Rivers State is the chief executive. He controls the state budget, the civil service, the security architecture, and the award of contracts. These are not symbolic powers. They are the mechanisms through which hundreds of billions of naira flow to communities, contractors, and political networks every single year. Fubara has attempted to exercise those powers fully. In February 2026, he dissolved his entire executive council, replacing officials who had been described as Amaechi loyalists. That dissolution was entirely within his constitutional rights as governor, but the fact that it was necessary, that a sitting governor had to conduct a purge of officials loyal to a predecessor of his predecessor, tells you everything about the depth of the factional paralysis Rivers State has been living through. The governor's formal powers are enormous, but those powers exist inside a constitutional system that requires the cooperation of the legislature to function, which brings us to level 2, the House of Assembly. This is where Wike's structural advantage is most acute and most dangerous. A governor without a cooperative legislature cannot pass a budget, cannot borrow money, cannot confirm key executive appointments, cannot legislate. The Rivers State House of Assembly, led by Speaker Martin Amaechi, was the central instrument of Fubara's administrative paralysis throughout 2023 and 2024. Think about what that means in practice. A governor who receives billions of naira in monthly oil derivation revenue, who cannot get a budget appropriated by the legislature, cannot direct a single naira of that money toward a project without serious legal exposure. The assembly is not merely a political problem for Fubara, it is a financial chokehold on his entire administration. And here is the strategic insight that almost every mainstream analysis misses. The question of whose faction controls the Rivers State House of Assembly after 2027 is not a secondary story, it is the primary prize. The governorship race is the headline. The assembly race is the mechanism through which the winner of the governorship either governs freely or governs in chains. Level 3. The APC party structure and the Rainbow Coalition. Wike's Rainbow Coalition, spanning the APC, PDP, Labour Party and the Action Alliance, is perhaps the most constitutionally audacious political construction in Nigeria today. The same man holds dominant influence over the ruling National Party's state structure and the main opposition party's state structure simultaneously. That means regardless of which party wins the governorship in 2027, Wike's fingerprints are on the outcome, unless his rivals can break that structure from within. At a Rainbow Coalition luncheon in May 2026, Wike made the architecture of this system explicit. He stated that the coalition had not yet decided who would be the next governor of Rivers State, but that any candidate seeking elective office who was not aligned with the coalition would find themselves irrelevant. That is not a statement about electoral competition. That is a description of a monopoly. The Supreme Court dimension. On February 28, 2025, the Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling on approximately 8 consolidated appeals arising from the Rivers State crisis. The court declared in unambiguous terms that a government cannot be said to exist if one of its 3 arms, executive, legislature, or judiciary, is non-functional. That ruling became one of the justifications cited for Tinubu's state of emergency declaration, and it continues to hang over Fubara's second-term ambitions like a legal sword. Here is the development nobody is reporting with the urgency it deserves. A Court of Appeal judgment in Port Harcourt has recently sacked Tony Okocha, a key Wike ally, as APC chairman in Rivers State, declaring all decisions taken under his leadership invalid. The APC chairmanship in Rivers is the structural key to Wike's entire Rainbow Coalition strategy. If that chairmanship is legally illegitimate, the party management architecture Wike has spent years constructing begins to crack, not at the ballot box, in the courts. His opponents understand this, and they are actively pursuing the Okocha ruling as the most viable instrument to dismantle Wike's grip before 2027. And there is a constitutional question about what happens if Fubara's own APC governorship nomination is legally challenged by Wike's faction. The constitutional answer to that question, which I will give you in Section 8, will surprise most Nigerians who believe they understand how INEC handles disputed candidacies. The institutions set the outer boundaries of this battle. Now let us examine what each of the 3 principles actually wants, because in this story, the stated positions and the real motivations are 2 very different things.
Wike's strategy: control without the title. Wike's genius and his danger to Nigerian democratic norms is that he has engineered a system in which he does not need to hold elected office to control electoral outcomes. He has designed himself out of the accountability structures of the governorship while retaining all of the influence. In May 2026, at a luncheon for Rainbow Coalition candidates in Port Harcourt, Wike said this: "The coalition has not yet decided who will become the next governor of Rivers State, but every candidate seeking elective office who is not aligned with the Rainbow Coalition will find themselves politically irrelevant." He is not saying, vote for my preferred candidate. He is saying, if you want to win, you must come to me first. Your legitimacy as a candidate is contingent on my endorsement. That is not electoral politics. That is a tribute system. Wike's preferred governorship candidates are Kingsley Chinda on the APC platform and Alabo George Kelly as an alternative. George Kelly in particular is not an independent political figure. He is deeply embedded in the infrastructure Wike built over decades, a trained quantity surveyor and civil engineer who has been part of the Rivers political machine from its foundations. But here is the most important insight about Wike's true strategic interest. It is not actually about which name appears on the governorship ballot. It is about ensuring that whoever wins owes their political existence entirely to him, so that the patronage flows continue, the contracts stay within his network, and his immunity from any future accountability for acts during his time in office remains structurally protected by the loyalty of whoever sits in government house. Wike does not need to be governor, he needs the governor to be his. Fubara's strategy: survive first, then win. Fubara's December 2025 defection to the APC was not an ideological conversion, it was a survival maneuver. He joined the ruling party primarily to escape the incessant impeachment threats from a Wike-aligned legislature. The move bought him breathing room, but defection was only the opening sequence. The second move is re-election in direct defiance of the conditions Wike imposed as the price of the 2025 peace deal. Fubara's APC governorship nomination forms were purchased and donated by a coalition of state stakeholders, a gesture their delegation leader described as driven by the overriding interest of the people of Rivers State, not by any single political faction. His strategic asset is the one thing Wike cannot manufacture or buy: genuine public sympathy. 2 years of watching a sitting governor be systematically harassed not by opposition politicians but by a former governor who now holds a federal ministerial appointment has generated substantial grassroots goodwill for Fubara among ordinary Rivers residents. People who are exhausted by this crisis, people who, when asked directly, blame Wike for it. That is not a manufactured sentiment, it is real, and Fubara's team knows it. The APC Governors Forum is also solidly behind Fubara. Multiple sitting APC governors have publicly called on President Tinubu to press Wike to stop destabilizing the party's structure in Rivers. That is a significant block of political pressure. Fubara's calculation is that this combination, grassroots goodwill plus Governor Forum solidarity, is enough to override Wike's structural and financial dominance when votes are actually cast. Amaechi's strategy, the presidential feint. This is the move the mainstream analysis is most consistently misreading, and understanding it correctly changes everything about how you read the 2027 Rivers State race. Rotimi Amaechi has formally entered the 2027 presidential race under the ADC platform. His supporters describe the move as the credible opposition challenge Nigeria has lacked. Amaechi's credentials are real: former governor, 2-term Speaker of the House of Representatives, former presidential campaign director. He is not a lightweight. But here is what the presidential framing obscures. 8 aspirants have already declared interest in the Rivers State governorship race under the ADC platform. Amaechi's presidential bid, fought on the same ADC banner, brings national media visibility and organizational resources to that party in Rivers simultaneously. Every ADC campaign event in Port Harcourt serves a dual purpose. It is a presidential rally and a Rivers State party-building exercise at the same time. Amaechi does not need to win the presidency for this strategy to succeed. He needs the ADC to perform well enough in Rivers to fragment Wike's Rainbow Coalition, to siphon votes that would otherwise consolidate behind the Wike-endorsed candidate. A strong ADC showing in Rivers creates the electoral chaos that forces Wike to negotiate rather than dictate. And Amaechi has said publicly that the Wike-Fubara feud is fundamentally about money sharing. He has challenged both men directly: come out and tell Rivers people what you are actually fighting about. When the man who built the original Rivers political infrastructure, who sat inside Government House Port Harcourt for 8 years and knows precisely what the financial architecture looks like from the inside, says the real issue is money, that is a statement you take at face value, not as rhetoric, as a structural diagnosis. The silent stakeholder, President Tinubu. President Tinubu personally superintended the peace deal that was supposed to end this crisis. Fubara reportedly appealed to Wike directly at a meeting in Abuja, pledging to avoid actions that could be perceived as being disrespectful. That meeting happened, and it changed essentially nothing. Tinubu's structural problem is this: he needs Wike, his most aggressive political foot soldier at the national level, the man who delivered critical political muscle during the 2023 presidential campaign, and he needs Fubara, a sitting APC governor whose loyalty signals the party's commitment to protecting its own elected officials. He cannot sacrifice one without weakening his position with the other. So Tinubu plays the role of reluctant mediator while both men operate beyond the boundaries he has attempted to set. The longer that dynamic continues, the more it exposes the limits of Tinubu's actual authority over his own political network. A president who cannot persuade his own minister to stop destabilizing an APC state is a president whose influence is more constrained than his public posture suggests. Now, before we go into what this means for the rest of Nigeria, drop a comment. Who do you think holds the real power in Rivers State right now? Wike, Fubara, or someone else entirely? Tell me in the comments. I read them. What happens in Rivers State does not stay in Rivers State. And I want to be precise about the reasons. The constitutional precedent. Tinubu's 2025 State of Emergency Declaration, which suspended elected officials, citing threats to law and order and damage to oil infrastructure, drew immediate legal challenge. The Nigerian Bar Association publicly objected. Over 40 cases were filed in court arguing that the president lacked constitutional authority to suspend a sitting governor through an emergency declaration. Here is the dangerous part. That constitutional question was never definitively resolved. The emergency was lifted before the courts could rule, which means the president now sits in Nigeria's constitutional history as an open wound. A future administration, one less constrained by democratic instinct than Tinubu has shown himself to be, can cite what happened in Rivers State as justification for suspending any inconvenient governor. The constitutional immunity of elected state executives is now less certain than it was before March 2025. The revenue consequence. Rivers State generates the highest internally generated revenue among all oil-producing states, despite not being the top crude producer. When governance is paralyzed by political warfare, when executive councils are dissolved, budgets blocked, and security forces politicized, it is not the politicians who absorb the cost. It is the contractors who cannot get paid, the civil servants whose salaries are delayed for months, the communities whose road projects stall mid-construction, the pipeline communities whose security becomes a bargaining chip in a feud being conducted by men in Port Harcourt and Abuja who do not live near any pipeline. The Godfather precedent. Rivers State now has the most fully developed case study in Nigeria of what political scientists call withdrawal of principal support, a situation where a patron who installed a client mobilizes every institutional lever available to destroy that client when loyalty is withdrawn. If Wike succeeds in blocking Fubara's re-election through party structure manipulation, coalition engineering, and pre-election legal challenges, rather than through actual electoral competition, the lesson transmitted to every political godfather in every state in Nigeria is this: you can override the will of an electorate using party machinery and the courts. You do not need votes, you need institutional leverage. That message has consequences far beyond Rivers State. The ethnic dimension. Rivers State is one of Nigeria's most ethnically complex states. Ijao, Ikwere, Ogoni, Kalabari, Okrika, and dozens of other communities coexist within its boundaries. Wike's signal of support for Alabo George Kelly has intensified debate over power rotation and ethnic inclusion, particularly whether Ogoni people are being systematically sidelined from the 2027 governorship calculations. When political battles in Rivers State ignore or deliberately suppress ethnic balance, the historical record of consequences is not ambiguous.
The Rivers State crisis does not end at Nigeria's borders, and the reasons are worth understanding clearly. International oil company interests. Rivers State hosts the Port Harcourt refinery and major onshore and offshore oil infrastructure operated by Shell, Total Energies, and Agip. Political instability that affects pipeline security directly affects production schedules, insurance risk ratings, and investment decisions by these companies. Every month of political crisis in Rivers State is a month of elevated operating risk for Nigeria's most significant foreign direct investment sector. International energy companies have been pressing the federal government for stability, not out of concern for Nigerian democracy, but because instability is expensive. Western diplomatic concern. The UK and US government monitor Rivers State as a governance risk indicator within their broader assessments of Nigerian democracy. The 2025 emergency declaration drew specific concern from Western diplomatic missions, not because those governments took a side in the Wike-Fubara dispute, but because the suspension of elected officials through presidential emergency powers is the kind of institutional maneuver that democratic backsliding literature identifies as an early warning sign for systemic erosion. The diaspora dimension. For Rivers State indigents abroad and their substantial Rivers communities in London, Houston, Calgary, and Atlanta, many of them oil and gas professionals, this crisis is personal. They remit money to families living under a government that cannot function normally. They make property investment decisions based on governance assessments, and they are actively being recruited by all three political camps to lend their names, networks, and resources to the fight. The Rivers diaspora community is itself divided along the same fault lines as the domestic crisis. Wike loyalists, Fubara supporters, and Amaechi backers all maintain diaspora networks that amplify the conflict internationally. The global pattern. What is happening in Rivers State is what democracy scholars call competitive authoritarianism at the subnational level. It has been documented in Venezuela, in Hungary, and in parts of South Africa, environments where formal democratic structures remain technically intact while actual power becomes concentrated in the hands of a single dominant actor who operates simultaneously through official and unofficial channels. Wike's Rainbow Coalition, spanning 4 parties simultaneously, is not a coalition-building exercise. It is the institutionalization of one man's political monopoly, using the structures of multi-party competition as its cover.
I want to give Wike's position a genuinely fair hearing, because the strongest version of his argument is one that many Nigerians, particularly those who understand how political agreements actually work in this country, find persuasive. The strongest case for Wike. Wike did not select Fubara arbitrarily. He mobilized the full force of the political machine he had spent 8 years constructing to deliver Fubara the governorship. He transferred power in the only way power is meaningfully transferred in Nigerian politics, through a binding arrangement witnessed at the highest levels of government with agreed terms on both sides. When Fubara began asserting independence, when he began behaving as though the agreement that made him governor did not apply to him, Wike's accusation is that this was a betrayal. A man who accepts the keys to government house under specific conditions, pledges loyalty in front of the President of the Republic, and then pursues his own agenda as though those conditions are irrelevant, is not, within the logic of Nigerian political agreements, simply exercising executive independence. He is defaulting on a contract. In the transactional logic of Nigerian politics, that grievance is not unreasonable. Political agreements in this country are understood as binding in ways that have real consequences when broken. Now, the dismantling. The problem with this argument is that it treats a private political arrangement as constitutionally superior to an electoral mandate. Fubara was not appointed by Wike. He was elected by Rivers State voters. The agreement Wike is citing as binding was a private arrangement reached under duress in the shadow of an impeachment threat that was itself constitutionally questionable. When a sitting governor can be threatened with removal unless he pledges loyalty to a former governor who now holds a federal ministerial appointment, the agreement that emerges from that threat is not a binding political contract. It is coercion. And coerced agreements do not carry the moral or constitutional authority that Wike is trying to claim for them. The constitutional principle that a governor's mandate belongs to the people who elected him, not to the patron who helped him win, is not a technicality. It is the foundation of what democratic governance means. 3 misconceptions circulating on social media. Wike is the real governor of Rivers State. Wike holds 0 executive authority over Rivers State. He is the FCT minister. His influence is structural, through party machinery, financial relationships, and assembly faction loyalty, but it carries no constitutional weight. Every directive he issues about Rivers State governance is technically the act of a private citizen and political actor, not a governmental authority. Fubara joining the APC means he now does whatever Abuja says. The defection was a survival maneuver, not an ideological shift. Fubara is pursuing his re-election in direct defiance of conditions that Tinubu himself witnessed and endorsed. His relationship with the APC is instrumentally opportunistic, not structurally loyal to the Asorok political establishment. Amaechi has a realistic path to the presidency.
At this stage, Amaechi's ADC presidential bid functions primarily as a platform-building exercise and a Rivers State flanking operation. The ADC faces serious internal challenges following the departures of Obi and Kwankwaso. The presidential aspiration is the frame, the Rivers State maneuver is the substance. The most dangerous misconception of all is that this crisis is a personality clash between Wike and Fubara. Amaechi, the architect of the Rivers political machine in the first place, who knows what sits inside Government House from years of personal experience, said publicly that the feud is fundamentally about money sharing. When the architect of the system identifies the real driver as financial, not personal, believe him. Rivers State receives hundreds of billions of naira annually. The war over who controls the apparatus that allocates those funds would exist regardless of the names of the combatants.
The three most likely next moves. First, Wike intensifies legal challenges against Fubara's APC nomination. Fubara reportedly obtained his governorship nomination forms through a proxy arrangement contrary to Wike's preference. Wike's camp will use that procedural detail and the terms of the peace deal as the basis for APC party disciplinary action and a court challenge to Fubara's eligibility to contest on the APC platform. Watch for any APC National Working Committee directive on Rivers State affairs within the next 30 days. That directive, if it comes, is the most important political signal of the pre-election period. Second, the Rainbow Coalition either consolidates fully or fractures along party lines. The coalition has not yet settled on a unified governorship candidate, and the Court of Appeal ruling voiding the decisions of Wike's preferred APC chairman weakens the structural glue holding the four-party arrangement together. If any of the four coalition parties files an independent governorship candidate before consensus is reached, the coalition breaks. That fracture is Fubara's best electoral scenario. A divided anti-Fubara vote is a survivable anti-Fubara vote. Third, Amaechi's ADC maneuver reshapes the opposition map in ways that create unpredictable downstream consequences. With 8 ADC governorship aspirants already declared in Rivers State and Amaechi's presidential platform providing national visibility to that party, the ADC becomes a credible spoiler that splits the anti-Fubara vote between Wike's coalition candidate and Amaechi-allied ADC candidate. A genuine three-way split, Fubara on APC, Wike's Rainbow candidate on a joint coalition ticket, and ADC ally on ADC, produces the most unpredictable electoral outcome in Rivers State's modern political history. The Constitutional Clause. Section 162, subsection 2 of the 1999 Constitution mandates that 13% of revenue from natural resources be returned to the states from which those resources are derived. This is the Derivation Fund. Rivers State received over 114 billion naira from this fund in just the first 5 months of 2025 alone. But here is the dimension almost no analyst has highlighted. The Rivers State House of Assembly controls budget appropriation. If Wike's faction retains assembly dominance after 2027, even if Fubara wins re-election as governor, he faces a legislature that can refuse to appropriate those derivation funds for his priority projects. Wike does not need to win the governorship to control the money. He needs to control the assembly. That has always been the real target. The APC nomination challenge. Under the APC's Constitution and the Electoral Act, a governorship candidate must be nominated through a valid primary election. If Wike's faction successfully contests the validity of Fubara's nomination process and the APC National Working Committee sides with Wike, which is not an improbable outcome given Wike's proximity to the Tinubu administration, Fubara could face a scenario in which 2 rival APC candidate lists are submitted to INEC, both claiming party legitimacy. INEC would then be left to adjudicate which list to accept. That adjudication goes to court. Nigerian courts have demonstrated repeatedly their willingness to make highly consequential pre-election rulings that reshape the electoral landscape before a single vote is cast. What to watch in the next 60 days? Whether the APC National Working Committee issues any formal directive on Rivers State party affairs, whether Kingsley Chinda's ongoing legal dispute over his House of Representatives seat is resolved before or after the APC primary, whether Fubara receives formal personal support from President Tinubu directly, not from the APC Governors Forum, but from Tinubu himself, which would be the clearest signal that Wike's influence over Asorok's Liver's calculations has materially diminished, and whether the NDC, following the Obi and Kwankwaso primaries, makes a serious play for the Rivers State governorship, which would introduce a fourth competitive force into an already fractured race.
We began with a question. Is this a political battle or a financial war dressed in political clothes? Everything we have examined says it is both simultaneously, and that is precisely what makes it so dangerous. The political battle is about who controls government. The financial war is about who allocates the hundreds of billions that flow into Rivers State every single month from oil derivation. And the constitutional battle, which none of the three principals are discussing in public, is about whether Nigerian democracy can survive the precedent that Rivers State is setting right now. Wike has demonstrated that a determined political patron working through party structure, legislative faction, coalition engineering, and legal challenge simultaneously can make a state ungovernable without holding a single elected office. If that model succeeds in 2027, if Fubara is blocked and a Wike-selected successor takes office, the lesson will be learned by every political godfather in every state in Nigeria. It will be studied, replicated, refined. The people of Rivers State deserve a governor they elected, not one approved in a private coalition meeting. They deserve a budget that serves their communities, not one blocked until the correct political debts are paid. And they deserve security forces that protect pipelines for the public good, not as a bargaining chip in a feud between men who each have, at various points, enriched themselves from the same state treasury they are now fighting over. What Nigerians, not just Rivers people, but all Nigerians should demand is this: that the courts adjudicate the constitutional questions about gubernatorial suspension cleanly and finally, that INEC enforces its candidate eligibility rules neutrally and without political interference, and that President Tinubu choose between being a democratic president and being Wike's political partner. He cannot credibly be both. If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.